Goedenavond allemaal. Good evening everyone, and welcome here in the Balie to those of you here present, but we also have people watching us online via the live stream on YouTube, so welcome to all of you as well. Thank you for joining us on this evening where we will be diving into the topic of feminist foreign policy, and we will be doing that for the next 90 minutes with international guests. Here they are. Welcome to the Netherlands, and here you are as well. I hope you are enjoying your time here in the Netherlands. My name is Jamila Ansi, and I'll be your moderator for this evening. I had the honor and pleasure of being the Dutch women's representative to the United Nations back in 2017 already, so it's an honor for me to be your host for this evening, and I welcome you on behalf of the Balie and Plan International, the Netherlands. We have a number of guests that we will be discussing feminist foreign policy with. We also have a lecture, we have a poem, and we hope to have some interaction with you, the audience, as well. And I'm very curious to know who we have here. Who works for Plan? Let's start with the easy one, easiest one. Who works for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs? Who is a student? A researcher? Do you belong to a group of people I didn't mention yet? Tell me, who are you?
I'm part of the She Leads program and also part of the feminist group.
Very good, welcome. I saw someone here as well, right? Who didn't I mention?
Hello, my name is Manjeet Krishna Kaur. I'm the artistic director of the Fifth Friday Sisterhood Advocacy Storytelling Platform.
Wow, everyone is like, wow. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. The title of this evening is How to Make Feminist Foreign Policy Work. Now, who thinks they have the ideal definition of feminist foreign policy? Because I remember the first time I heard about it, that was when I went to the screening of the documentary The Feminister, where they followed the Swedish Minister of Foreign Affairs. I think her name was Wallström. And that's the first time I encountered the term of feminist foreign policy. Anyone willing to give us the best definition of feminist foreign policy? No? Well, yes. Go for it.
I think it's a policy in which like every aspect of what your foreign policy is, so from humanitarian aid to your defense policy to development cooperation, you take into account unequal power relations between men and women, but also gender non-conforming people and communities that are truly marginalized, and make sure that they are at the decision-making table, because your foreign policy affects their lives directly.
Does that make sense? Who are you?
I'm Annika. I work at Women Equals Men Dutch Gender Platform.
Very good. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And we hope to have some more interactive moments with you in the next 90 minutes. But let me put this one over here. Before we talk to our international guests and our ambassador for gender equality and women's rights, let us just first start with the beginning, and that is why we are here. And my first guest is Joyce Brummelman. You're from Plan International, the Netherlands, and you are the one who initiated the She Leads program. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so the She Leads program, we worked as Plan International with it together in a consortium. So it's not only Plan International initiating this, but we're doing this in coordination and in collaboration with Terre des Hommes, Defense for Children, and also Femnet. It's our Southern-led organization that we work together with. And it's a 5-year strategic partnership with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs And we also have a technical partner, Equal Measures. They're focusing on data-driven advocacy.
And what is the program about?
The program is about, so it's a collaboration of different organizations coming together saying, okay, gender inequality, we see that in different parts of the world, and we think it affects women, but also young women. So we want to focus on girls and young women who have been affected by gender inequality. And we thought about how can we support girls and young women organizations internationally to advocate for equal rights and
is that worldwide or specific regions?
It's in 9 countries. It's in 7 African countries and 2 countries in the Middle East. So that's where we're implementing the program, and it's because it's a 5-year program. We started now. We're now halfway, and the girls and young women and the coordinators of the program are now here in the Netherlands to really assess how far are we until now, what is our impact until now. And the program is really about strengthening civil society in those countries, so in those 7 countries in Africa and 2 in the Middle East, strengthening civil society and especially girls and young women-led organizations. So we call it She Leads, so it's really She Leads strengthening youth-led organizations, so it's resourcing youth-led organizations, if they're formal or informal structured. But besides that, we really want her to lead, so we want young women to be the leaders, so we also have the consortiums in the countries being coordinated by young women themselves that are from the country. So
and I will be talking to 2 of them,
yes,
She Leads
exactly.
Coordinators, but there are more ambassadors here, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Who do we have in the room? Tell us about them.
So besides the coordinators that we have, these young females who are coordinating and implementing the program, we also have the Girls and Young Women Board. I'm looking at some of them already here as Adama, Mama Sampi, Masula, and Esha. And they are activists in their own country. They're working with youth-led organizations. They're advocating for gender equality. And we thought, besides implementing with youth-led organizations, we also want to be monitored and accountable to young activists in the countries themselves. So they formed the Girls and Young Women Board. And they are assessing the impact that we do so far, that we have so far, and also advising the program. Is the strategy correct? Where do we have to focus on more? So they did this research also with more than 100,000 girls. They talked in focus group discussions. Is the program meaningful? What are you targeting? How can we improve? So this is what we're talking about this week with them. So that's why they're here. They're really monitoring us if we are.
And you've brought us all here together in the Balie. Why?
Yeah.
What do you hope people go home with tonight?
I really hope that people go home in trusting the civil society in the different countries, and really the youth-led organizations and youth that are activists and speaking out for their rights, to see that they're able to claim their space. You will hear Hamanato Mansouré and Caroline Baraya also speak later on about what they are doing, how they are impacting, and bringing them here. We brought them here because we're working in 9 countries, but we don't see each other every day, so it's also about linking. So we want to link with each other, but also with you, with people who are looking in online, but also people in the audience. We want to link up and make sure that there's strength in numbers, we feel. So we really want to eventually build a movement that youth-led organizations are trusted, are supported, are resourced, and are given the space to speak out. Yeah.
Well, thank you. We'll do our best to make people go home with those thoughts and ideas and maybe some new alliances. Who knows? Maybe we'll talk to each other at the end of the evening to see how what you thought of what you heard.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Joyce.
Thank you.
And I didn't even mention your title, but you're the Global Advocacy Network Coordinator of the program She Leads, so that everyone knows who you are and where they can find you on LinkedIn. Thank you. And now we are going to listen to Nisrim. And she is one of the coordinators of the She Leads program in Ghana. And she's going to recite a poem on what it feels like to be a woman. And the poem is written by Hikmet, also part of the She Leads program in Ghana. But she unfortunately couldn't join us today. So we have Nisrim here with us. Are you ready, Nisrim?
Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Nisreen Aliu. I'm from Ghana, and I'm reciting this poem written by my friend and colleague from Ghana as well, Hikmat Sungdami. So the poem goes, in the heart of Ghana, where hope was rare, she emerged from shadows with fiery stare, a warrior of dreams with courage untamed, a beacon of light with passion inflamed. Her journey began in a humble abode, where poverty thrived and dreams corrode, but her spirit, unyielding, refused to succumb. As she fought for a future where dreams would become, through trials and hardships, she forged her way, overcoming obstacles day by day. With determination as her guiding light, she ventured forth, determined to ignite. In a world where girls were meant to stay at home, she defied the norms, refusing to roam, for education beckoned a flame in her soul. A thirst for knowledge, she vowed to extol. Through dusty roads, under scorching sun, she walked with purpose, her journey began. A trailblazer in the village site, a trailblazer with dreams shining so bright. She found solace in books, words became her might. She learned to yield knowledge, a beacon of light. With every page unturned, her mind soared high. Imagination unleashed, reaching the sky. From the northern plains, she rose above. Her dreams soared high, fueled by her love. For education is power to change destinies, to liberate minds and shatter fallacies. Now in the university, her spirit aflame. Her voice resounds as she calls each name of girls and young women from rural lands, whose dreams lay buried beneath shifting suns. She stands tall, an inspiration so brave, a symbol of hope for those she will save. Through advocacy's might, she empowers all to break down barriers and stand tall. Her words, like wildfire, ignite the minds of those who listen, seeking what binds. The power of knowledge, the strength within, to transform communities and let dreams begin. Beauty, brainy, and brave she has become, a force to be reckoned with. This young woman from Ghana's north, she shines like a star, illuminating paths near and far. So let her story echo through the land of a girl who fought to take a stand. Her journey, a testament, her spirit ablaze. Beauty, brainy, and brave, she amazes. Thank you.
Thank you, Nisreen. That was beautiful. Thank you very much. And I would like to now invite two She Leads coordinators to come and sit with me here at the table, Caroline Boraya and Hawanatu Mansarai.
You can sit down.
Welcome, ladies, and let me properly introduce you. Caroline Boraya from Kenya.
Yes.
Yes. Welcome. You're the coordinator of the She Leads program in Kenya, and you have been passionately dedicated to youth, children, and women development and empowerment for the past 7 years. And you have won the Queen Young Leaders Award in 2015 for your outstanding work in empowering teenage mothers in Mombasa County.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Good. And Hawanatu Mansarai, welcome. You're from Sierra Leone.
Thank you.
And you're the coordinator of the She Leads program there. And you were chosen on the list of 50 most influential Sierra Leonean, an award that celebrates your relentless efforts in contributing to the development of your country.
Yeah.
Very good. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
How long have you been here in Amsterdam?
3 days now.
3 days.
Came on Saturday. Yeah.
You have a busy program?
Yeah, we have.
What have you been up to? What have you been up to? Who have you been talking to?
It's a lot of reflections we are having with the whole coordinators team, with the advisory board, just reflecting the journey She Leads has been so far, what we've been able to do. We recently had a midterm review, so we are looking at the findings and interrogating them further on how best we can improve in the next 2 years.
Yeah, and also making sure we identify the gaps and what strategies we can be able to utilize in 2024 and 2025 to enhance the goal and the impact of the She Leads program in the 9 countries that we are implementing it.
And we're going to reflect with you on the program as well, but maybe let's reflect first on the poem we just heard. What did you feel listening to those words?
Well, you know, poetry has a way of speaking to the soul, not just, and it provokes your thoughts. For a girl sitting and penning down her feelings and making a request that we need to have her voice heard across the land, that really speaks much on, there's a lot of work we need to do as a collective to ensure that girls and young women voices are heard. Yeah.
You, Hawa?
Yeah, and I feel like some emancipation, like a girl trying to climb out of a hole, because if you live in country like Africa or West Africa, the norms, the values and beliefs are going to kill you and press you down in holes that you cannot jump over them. So you really need like the superpower or the support system that you can be able to get to be able to jump over those holes and climb up back. So I think it speaks volume about the girl trying to really shows how much she has been able to climb and to be able to jump those hurdles that will limit them for becoming or maximizing their fullest potential.
And I'm sure that's what you see in your work as a She Leads coordinator. Tell us about your work in Sierra Leone.
Yeah, so in Sierra Leone, in the She Leads program, of course, learning from other programs that have been implemented in Sierra Leone, we do engage traditional leaders. Those are the ones that hold customs, values, and beliefs to the highest esteem. And those beliefs and values limit girls and young women from taking the space, from taking leadership role, and from maximizing their potential, because those customs allow them to get married early. They get into female genital mutilation without them consenting. And it also give them the opportunity to drop out of school, not getting the opportunity to be able to push. And so we do dialogue with those traditional leaders and religious leaders to be able to change those norms and values and belief. And another thing we do is we build an alliance with other civil society organizations to be able to push government to develop laws, strategies, and policies that can be able to address these barriers and these values within communities. So we work with other like-minded CSOs and gender organizations and civil society organizations to be able to make sure that we lobby government. And recently we succeeded together with other civil society organizations to influence government to adopt the Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment Act. And it was finally signed by the President of Sierra Leone in 2023. So that particular law gives hope that with time, we will be able to make sure that women have the space, they have the opportunity, and they can be able to have the representation and the voice that is required for them to have gender equality and women's empowerment. And we do this lobby and advocacy together with very vibrant girls and young women's group that we are working with in Sierra Leone.
Is that similar for you, Caroline?
Yes, so what we do as a consortium in Kenya is that we are very deliberate in collaborating with both the state and non-state actors, and most importantly, putting girls and young women at the center of it all. Whatever law we're advocating for and the advocacy we do at the community level, we ensure we are working with the girls from the planning phase of it, identifying what are the areas of interest that they would want to advocate for, and trusting that they know what their agency is at this point in time, and just pushing them forward to advocate for it. So we work with, at the community level, we also have male allies. We know girls and young women do not exist in a vacuum society. They have other people that they stay within the community. So bringing them on board as male allies to advocate for the needs and the rights of girls and young women has been a key.
And does being
thing.
part of the She Leads program help you to make more impact?
Yes, because She Leads, as a consortium, we have different organizations that bring different strengths. So utilizing the strengths that we have and the diversity within the consortium helps us be able to have a voice. There's power in numbers. The more you are advocating for one agency, the bigger the magnitude that has.
And does it enable you to reach more groups that you can reach before, or is it still hard to not reach certain groups?
Yeah, I think the beauty of She Leads is that it sells itself. So when groups hear about She Leads, we've had representatives from different groups coming to us expressing interest that they want to be part of the She Leads program because, they've heard about it, they've seen it on social media, they see the beautiful work that girls and young women are doing. So it's easier for them to align with these kind of gains and want to be part of the process to push for women's representation and empowerment within the country. So I think it's easier for people to align with the program. Yeah.
And because of the She Leads program, I think you have some idea of the feminist foreign policy of the Netherlands. How would you define the FFP?
I think having a feminist foreign policy is a beautiful thing, and it further gives us the hope of women's rights representation. And it also gives us the opportunity to check, for reality check, how are we doing? What are the things that we need to do differently? And it also reminds us about resourcing, because also in some of our countries, you have laws, but are there budgeting for the implementation of these laws? Do we have resources to be able to carry out the strategies to enhance the implementation of these laws? So I think it gives hope for those 4 rights, 4 R's. But I think it also reminds us that we need to make sure that foreign trade and foreign aid are also bringing the gender equality that we want and the empowerment that we want, and not contributing to widening the gap. For example, making sure that if you're giving aid or you're doing trade transaction with multinational companies within countries like Sierra Leone, you don't do things that will be able to contribute to widening the gap of gender equality and putting women and children at risk, because you have companies going to harvest natural resources. How do we make sure feminist foreign policy also deal with those things? If you're harvesting natural resources, is the country benefiting from it? Or are you just widening the gap? And we have situations where staff members of those companies will exploit sexually women and leaving them with children to be able to take care of. So I think also that is something feminist foreign policy needs to look into, to make sure that if there are laws, there are development processes, there are mechanisms to be able to deal with those baggages that it comes with, so that we can be able to enhance gender equality.
How about you, Caroline? What would you do differently or add to a nation's feminist foreign policy?
For me, what I would add is just a reflection that having the feminist foreign policy shows there's a goodwill, and we are acknowledging that women's rights are a human right. However, one thing I would want to add to what my colleague has said, ensuring that how are we using this policy to be checks and balances to the other foreign policies that we have around trade. How are we ensuring that whatever policy we are pushing within the specific countries that we are in is still upholding women's rights and promoting and protecting the women in those respective countries? Yeah.
Thank you. I know there are some other international guests sitting right and left from me. Does anyone have something to add? And I have a handheld microphone here to see if there are any other ideas on what you need in your countries from feminist foreign policy, from a country like the Netherlands, or is there something that you would like to add to the policy? And looking at each other, they're thinking very hard. I was told that you are the youngest here, right? Or not? Mm-hmm. Or you're one of the youngest ones. Maybe, and you're from Jordan, right? Maybe you could tell us something about, because we've heard from Sierra Leone and Kenya, maybe you can tell us something about Jordan.
Sure. Firstly, like what my colleagues already mentioned, and they did it so beautifully, it does really show goodwill, and we in Jordan and other countries who receive this sort of aid from the Netherlands, we're very excited to have this policy set in place, as it will also inspire other countries such as Jordan or Sierra Leone to follow this pathway, or actually shed some lights on the gaps that we have in our countries, which is something that I'm sure it's going to happen in the near future.
What is the main gap you're concerned about?
Putting me under the spotlight. Well, unfortunately in Jordan, and such as unfortunately also in other countries, we're a little bit behind in basic rights for women and girls, such as eliminating the child marriage law, giving the nationalities for children of Jordanian women, not from Jordanian men, other basic rights that are basically human and child rights. So this is something that I would love to see as a financial aid, such as the Netherlands, that they have this power that they could actually enforce and help us in Jordan to shed the lights, such as the She Leads project that is doing now in Jordan.
Thank you, that's very concrete. Anyone from this side? Yes? Tell us who you are and where you're from.
Hi everyone, my name is Esther Nyawera. I am from Kenya. I coordinate the She Leads regional program, and I think the conversation on feminist foreign policy is a good opportunity for us. For me, I see it as an entry point opportunity for us to have, hard discussions that as human beings we avoid having. But they are very critical, like the power dynamics between the global north and the global south. What is the contribution of, for instance, African feminists' realities in this policy? And also how do we move from theory? Because some of our problems cannot be eliminated by a policy in one day. But as human beings, we have to be deliberate in our actions, because the way we see things as Africans is very different from, for instance, the way and our realities in Africa are very different from the global north. And so for me, I see it as an opportunity for us to have those genuine and hard discussions, and being open to receive have that conversation.
Thank you very much. Caroline and Hawa, what in your eyes is the main gap or main inequality that you're worried about in your countries and that you would love to see support from a foreign feminist policy? Who would like to start?
Well, I can go first. For me, and it's a hope I have for the feminist foreign policy, that we are not jumping on another trend just to seem trendy or keeping up with the current trends in the development world, that will be intentional and ensuring that whatever is in the policy speaks to the realities of the feminist movements we have across board, and also just to ensure that it speaks and adheres to what it says, and it's not one of the documents we'll have just to say, to tick a box that we already have it.
Yeah, so I would say a few things we'll borrow, because we know the Netherlands have retained from their 4 R's, the reality check and the resourcing. So for reality check, when we look at countries like Sierra Leone, we celebrate the gender Equality and Women's Empowerment Act. But there is a bottleneck law that will definitely complicate or implicate that particular law in Sierra Leone. So the 1991 Constitution is yet to be reviewed, and it gives opportunity to customs and traditions to trample on the right of women to assume leadership in areas like the north in Sierra Leone. So if you are not part of a secret society, which is made up of male, and that particular secret society determines who becomes a leader in those particular areas. So at the end of the day, automatically women are kicked out of the circle of expressing their views and opinion. So with feminist foreign policy, we can be able to check ourselves and see that, are we intentional about this change that we want? Are we making sure that we are looking at all of the spheres that is supposed to be checked, so that at the end of the day, we are not only making laws, say representation. What about those customs and tradition and those laws that are giving them the power for men to become more powerful and patriarchy to continue to rule? They are also dealing with them. So I think that is something that I love about feminist foreign policy and how it can be borrowed so that Sierra Leone can utilize to be able to address some of those gaps that's for gender equality.
Thank you. I wanted to take a moment to see if our audience maybe has some questions for the both of you. Yes, I see someone there. Katrina, can you? Katrina is coming your way. We have oh, don't hurt anyone. We have a few minutes to do maybe 2 questions. So if you could just shortly state what that is.
Caroline Mariah, I was curious, you mentioned male allies. We can see around the room there are not that many men here. How do you engage men with feminist foreign policy?
Do I answer that now?
Yes, if you
Okay,
will.
that's a good question. So the strategy we have as a country is that we are very deliberate in going to where they are to ensure that we are doing a targeted approach, because, you know, again, engaging men as allies to our feminist program or our women-led program is not easy. But what works is we go to where they are and try to understand what is the understanding of the feminism first. Then there's a lot of unlearning and relearning that we have to do, both from our perspective as feminists and them as the male allies that we want to work with. And that has been proven to work, because right now we have men who've become like peer mentors to their fellow men within the community, and encouraging men to advocate against female genital mutilation, early marriage, and other retrogressive negative social norms that have been affecting the effective participation of girls and young women within the community. So there's learning and relearning from both sides, not just the men, bringing the men on board to where we are, but also we as feminists understanding what are the barriers that we've created that they're not able to engage.
And is it easy? Is it getting easier to engage men?
With time, it gets easier. At the starting point, you know, change is very different. Nobody likes change, but with time and consistency, people get on board.
Is that the same in Sierra Leone?
Yeah, so men are resistant to change because they are also intimidated. The fact that women taking the space and women having the power will put them behind. So for a very long time, this has been their niche, and this has been something that they carry. So they are feeling like we need to still keep women behind and make sure that they do not take the space for us. So, but over time, this is changing, because one strategy that we use is telling them that this is not a power fight. It's about having a support system. If we have men and women in equal scale, then we can see more development in our society. We can be able to do more things better. Men life can get lighter. They can grow older and they can live long. So we bring fun for them to understand that it's also heavier on them, carrying all of the power, all of the decision-making opportunities. Yeah. So this is something that in our conversation, this is something that we tell them, that if you give women the space, then it lifts up a burden or a pound on you. you as a man. So at the end of the day, you have somebody that will support you with the decision-making processes, and and it's working slowly.
It's a good way of selling it.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was a good question. We have time for one more. If there's anyone in the, is there someone? Yes. Are you coming?
So I just wanted to comment about using the men as and so we just don't work with them. We also try to use them as agents of change. So for example, in Ghana, we organized a cooking competition for the meal because we have myths around in Africa, Ghana, that men don't cook, men don't do all that. So, and we wanted the men to support their wives in, clean up the house so that the women too can have space to, further their education or do other things aside their housework. So when, the program was all arranged and people saw men cooking and, they made comments like, so this man didn't die or he didn't lose his manhood and all that. So people see and then they know that, so what we have in mind, that's not really it. And then there's nothing wrong with a man cooking. And so we're just trying to say that if we use men in some of these spaces, they act as the truth or the facts. Instead of us, we just saying and saying and saying. We use them for other people to see as an example. Yeah.
Thank you, Nisreen. Speaking of men, in my next panel, we have from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Women's Rights and Gender Equality Ambassador, Peter Derkhoff. Welcome. Now, this is your moment to take some time and some space to give him some input or maybe some advice. Okay. I'm sure you have some input.
Yeah. Okay, so...
She's like, okay, let's do this.
Well, for us, I think the agency we have, and this is a request to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, one, we are grateful and acknowledge the contribution that the fund is doing, especially through the She Leads program. However, moving forward, I think it will be good to have a flexible funding model directly to the girl-led movements, young feminist movements that we are building right now as a program, because there's a lot of restriction that comes with funding, but if it is flexible and intentionally directed to the grassroots movement for girls and young women, I think it will go a long way in ensuring that the girls are able to prioritize what their needs are at any point in time without having a restriction that the funding only focuses on this glass and we have to work towards this glass. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hawa, what's your advice or input for the ambassador?
Yeah, so adding to what Caroline said, from my end, I think the Ministry of Foreign Affairs have been doing a lot when it comes to gender empowerment and promoting equality. So we give them an applaud for that, and we hope and pray to continue. So one thing I would like to say is make sure that for our countries, when they also meet at those forums, those platforms, the CSW, the Human Rights Council, the UNCRC, the HRC, let us talk about the gaps. Let us talk about the reality. What are the things that we need to change? It's not just about the beautiful things. What are the gray areas that we need to address? So I think that is something that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs needs to look into to make sure that they continuously support our countries, because it's good to give direct resourcing. It's good to be able to support us, but at that level, also having conversation with our government and making sure that they flag some of these issues. I think those are things that I will be really grateful for. In addition to the fact that at least we continue with our capacity strengthening, because they've been doing a lot of capacity building for us, but I think strengthening our capacity more to have the expertise to be able to provide support for the groups that we're already working with are key recommendation that I will provide for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you so much, ladies, Caroline and Hawanatu. And I'm sure I'll come back to you later on when I speak with the ambassador. Maybe he will reflect on your advices. But for now, thank you so much for sharing your impressive stories from your countries and the work that you there. And we wish you all the luck. Thank you.
Thank you.
Before we speak to the ambassador, we will be listening to researcher and lecturer Lucy Hall on the history and challenges of doing feminist foreign policy, and she will be giving us a more of an international perspective. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm incredibly humbled to be amongst the company here tonight, and I could actually, I got a bit of a shock because I could see myself on the screen just nodding, enthusiastically listening to everything that you were saying. So thank you so much for having me. I'm, as I said, incredibly humbled. I want to start today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land from where I come from, the land where I was a child, where I completed my studies, and today I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past and present. I wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians, the Whadjuk people, and acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and the contribution they make to the region of Western Australia where I grew up. Australia will be voting in a referendum on October 14 to decide whether to enact an Indigenous voice to Parliament. We don't have that yet. If approved, the vote would recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the country's constitution and establish a permanent body for them to give advice on laws. But why do I start there? Why do I start in Australia at an event on feminist foreign policy with a reflection on a very specific set of politics in a place far away? Well, first of all, I think it's really important to position oneself and acknowledge the politics of where I come from. But I also think there are important questions that arise from the legacies of colonisation when we talk about feminist foreign policy. So I want to talk to you about this place. This is an aerial shot of a place called Woomera. Woomera is in South Australia. And in the 1940s and 1950s, it was used by the British to test nuclear weapons. The Indigenous community that lived here was not informed of this testing, nor were they moved away from the blast zone. And from 1946, around 315 nuclear tests were carried out in the Pacific by the US, the UK, and France. These nations' largest ever nuclear tests took place on colonised lands and colonised oceans, from Australia to the Marshall Islands, Kiribati to French Polynesia. Woomera and nearby Maralinga have become a symbol for both the desecration and the pollution and displacement of Indigenous peoples from their lands. If we jump forward to the 1990s, Woomera has been used as an immigration detention centre. This was built on a defence site and was introduced in 1999 by the Liberal government under John Howard. It was closed in April 2003 and handed back to the Australian Department of Defence. Independent reports documented incidences of sexual violence, torture and abuse that constitute violations of international law. While Woomera is now closed, Australia's practices of immigration detention and offshoring migration management that started in the 1990s are now being admired, explored and considered by places like the UK and in parts of Europe. So for me, this part of Australia represents an historical continuation of colonisation, dispossession, militarisation, and human rights violations. And while Australia is yet to develop a feminist foreign policy, I think a starting point would be addressing the legacy of weapons testing, colonisation, and detention and torture carried out in places like Woomera. So while I'm in favour of Australia and any other state or regional body developing a feminist foreign policy, I think a starting place needs to acknowledge the gendered and racist legacies of colonisation and militarisation, as the impact of these practices continues today. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women in Australia are more likely to die during childbirth at almost 3 times the rate of non-Indigenous women. And Australia still operates 2 offshore processing centres where asylum seekers and refugees are held, the islands of Manu and Nauru. And both of these places have been widely condemned for systemic abuses and human rights violations. We know at least 12 people have died in these places, including being murdered by guards, through medical neglect, and by suicide. And so maybe you're thinking, okay, terrible story, what the hell has this got to do with feminist foreign policy? I can imagine that you didn't come here for a lecture on all of Australia's history of nuclear testing and human rights violations. But for me, there are 2 connections to feminist foreign policy. The first is understanding that feminist foreign policy has emerged from over a century of women activists, civil society organisations, and social movements coming together in the interest of demilitarisation, reducing weapons stockpiles, and a vibrant anti-nuclear politics. And I feel particularly determined to ensure that advances in feminist foreign policy take seriously the gendered impact of weapons testing and weapons manufacturing. The second point is that at this current moment where we're seeing people displaced due to violence, armed conflict and disasters at an alarming rate, we see Europe continue to look to technologies, artificial intelligence and offshore agreements to escape its legal responsibilities towards refugees. So for me, what's important to reflect upon is this question of how do states develop a feminist foreign policy in and around these legacies of colonisation and militarisation? And how are these legacies wrapped up in our current crises of war and climate change? So to bring it to the context of the Netherlands, what I'm curious to follow as the momentum for an FFP increases is to see how it does this while reflecting on its own colonial legacies. And in the policy space of women, peace and security, where we see a lot of commitment from the Netherlands, including the publication of 4 national action plans, we don't see the voices of women from the Dutch Caribbean. They remain largely invisible in public debate and policy initiatives in this space. A space, importantly, a space which is a precursor to developing a feminist foreign policy. So although a relatively new phenomenon, feminist foreign policy has clear connections to long-established practices around states' efforts to ensure policymaking is more gender equal. These include state practices around gender mainstreaming, the growth of gender quotas, and affirmative action within political elections. But what exactly feminist foreign policy is, what it means, what it consists of, remains contested. It absolutely expands upon and builds upon the feminist activism that brought to life the UN Security Council resolutions on women, peace and security. But the rise of research on the rise. I'm usually in bed by 9:30. Is that really sad? Anyway, I'm old. Okay. I'm really feeding off the energy of the young people in the room. Okay. Research on the rise of feminist foreign policy and women, peace and security has highlighted how this shift has largely been based on this assumption that gender equality has been achieved at home. And this shifts this policy focus outwards. It shifts this idea that gender inequalities, violence and insecurity is a problem elsewhere. It also raises the question of how do we understand the word foreign in foreign policy? Because integral to understanding the word foreign in foreign policy is this idea that is the external deployment of instrumental reason on behalf of an unproblematic internal identity. And I find this idea of an unproblematic internal identity fascinating, because I think bring me the state, bring me the region, bring me the country that doesn't have an unproblematic internal identity. I also think this view of foreign policy disconnects it from the domestic context and the violent practices and discourses that are experienced within that domestic space. It reinforces the separation between domestic and foreign policies, in effect denying that gendered violence occurs at all levels of global, regional, national and local politics. It occurs in homes, in schools, in universities, in the halls of government, in peacekeeping missions, and in global financial institutions, just to name a few. We also need to be mindful that gains and successes concerning gender, women's rights, and feminist foreign policy are precarious. If we look at Sweden, Sweden is now going to be the first state to have a feminist foreign policy and the first state to revoke it. Foreign Minister Tobias Billström declared the policy's reversal, saying, "Gender equality is a core value for Sweden and this government, but we will not conduct a feminist foreign policy." He continued to say that with a feminist foreign policy, the label obscures the fact that Swedish foreign policy must be based on Swedish values and Swedish interests. And while it's too early to say how this shift is going to play out in practice, the rebranding towards Swedish values and Swedish interests I find particularly interesting and troubling against the backdrop of rising extremist views in Sweden concerning gender, race and sexuality. We also need to ask questions about what makes a feminist foreign policy feminist. Can you be a global leader in feminist foreign policy like Sweden is, or maybe like Sweden was, and also be ranked 13th in the world for global exports of military equipment? Others have noted these hypocrisies in the implementation of the Swedish FFP, particularly with regards to Sweden's arms exports and its migration policy, both of which have gendered consequences, and both of which bring me back to where I started, with questions about Australia's history of weapons testing and its approach to migration. If other countries are considering following Sweden, and by following Sweden I mean implementing an FFP, not revoking an FFP because you have a change in government, there are some interesting lessons to be learned. First of all, states and organisations should be clear from the outset about how an FFP will be implemented in practice. They should take steps to integrate and support feminist thinking in the daily lives of the foreign and civil servants responsible for it. And second, an FFP should be initiated in a receptive domestic environment. And I highlight the words receptive domestic environment because I have concerns, particularly in the lead up to the elections here in November, as to how receptive the domestic environment here is to a feminist foreign policy. But to be clear, these are questions that I'm asking. These are not questions that I have the answer to. So to bring my presentation to a close, while it is important to acknowledge and indeed celebrate the gains that have been made by the incredible efforts of feminist activists across time and space, we need to make sure that as we move towards a feminist foreign policy, we're not just looking at adding women and assuming that it will be feminist. We also need to draw attention to the underlying gendered, sexualised and racialised assumptions that exist within the institutions, practices and ideas of both domestic and foreign policy. At its core, feminist foreign policy is about power and understanding that there won't be any peace without feminism. But we need to be curious about what type of a feminist foreign policy and with what consequences. We can't assume that all feminists everywhere agree on what it means to be a feminist or to do a feminist foreign policy. So while we see the rise and continuation of market-oriented ideologies and the rise of right-wing populism and how these twin things continue to sort of close space and civil society space within Europe for feminist advances and policy debates, it is perhaps naive to hope and to call on policymakers to bring a feminist ethic of intersectionality to their decision-making. As an intersectional feminist foreign policy can provide the momentum to move towards a more inclusive world, whilst looking backwards to acknowledge the gendered and violent colonial legacies that it's left behind. And I'd like to close by citing feminist academic and peace activist Laura Shepherd, who writes, "It is only through gauging with humility, persistence and hope that we might contribute in some small way to the construction of a different world." So this was my attempt to construct a different world through humility, persistence and hope. And I'd like to thank the activists and the civil society members here for reinstilling that sense of hope, because what I do every day is look at and make sense of the rising levels of gendered violence. And I'm sure there are moments where you also feel incredible sense of despair, an incredible sense of like, wow, this is truly horrendous that we live in a world with such obscene levels of violence. And I'd like to thank you in the face of that for bringing the energy, because it really gives me hope that the future is looking good. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy Hall, for your lecture and your international perspective on FFP. Please join me at the table. And I would also like to invite Peter Derkhoff and Laila Eid Balie to join us here for our next conversation. Where we'll continue to reflect on the Dutch feminist foreign policy. Peter Derkhoff, you're the ambassador of women's rights and gender equality on behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And it's only been very recent that you have followed Pascal Grotenhuis' footsteps, who was one of the initiators of FFP in the Netherlands. I think it's 7 weeks, 8 weeks? Very recent.
I think it's 8 weeks now
8 weeks.
Since I started.
Well, we're very happy that you are here. Laila Eid Balie is the director of Women Equals Men, Dutch Gender Platform, and you have been involved in advising the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on the topic of FFP. That's correct?
That's correct.
Thank you both for being here, and thank you also, Lucy, for joining us. I don't have to say Mr. Ambassador. Peter Derk is what we've agreed on. How have you been listening to everything that's been said this past hour?
Well, as you said, I just started, so this for me is also a learning experience. And I was really, well, of course, I was very much moved by the poem. It really touched me. But I was also moved and impressed by the words of Carolina and Hawanatu when talking about, for instance, the ways they made the way they made changes by talking to religious leaders, by forming allies, making allies, and thus starting a process towards changing laws, which really shows what can be achieved by local organizations in their lobby and advocacy work, supported also by Dutch organizations. So I heard some very impressive stories.
That's good. And you've been an ambassador in most recently in Yemen, but based in Jordan, but also in other countries. What have you seen in your work as an ambassador when it comes to women's rights and gender equality?
Well, yes, as you said, I've been ambassador to Yemen for 3 years, and Yemen was consistently ranked last in the Gender Gap Index for 21 years. It was very much, Yemen is one of the focus countries where we have quite a large development cooperation program. And we really worked on that. We worked on the issue of rights, being the last country left in Yemen, work on sexual and reproductive health and rights in our development cooperation program, really on issues of family planning, on safe abortion, on comprehensive sexuality education. We worked on representation, supporting the feminist roadmap to peace, really a local initiative involving many local Yemeni women's organizations in developing their views and advocating on how they saw peace in Yemen. We supported a lot of Track 2 initiatives, supporting women's organizations, youth organizations, and we made sure that all our development funding, we did basically a gender testing. What are the effects of our funding? Not only when it comes to SRHR, but also, for instance, in water projects. Who decides on who gets water, which is a scarce product in Yemen. So making sure that women were always well represented in water users groups. So it was really, in everything we did in Yemen, we included or tried to include a gender perspective.
Yeah, and now you have a new job where the gender perspective is 100%. What are your ambitions as the new ambassador for gender equality and women's rights?
Well, that's a tough question. I don't think it will be just my ambitions. We have, of course, a great team. Some of them are here in the room. We have a task force for gender equality and women's rights. But I'd like to underline that our feminist foreign policy is relatively new, 1.5 years old. And as was said by some of the speakers, it's not just about having a good development policy, including gender in your development policy. Feminist foreign policy touches upon all fields, everything that we do. It also, we need to incorporate it in what we do on trade, on consular affairs, on humanitarian assistance, on security, basically everything we do within the ministry, within the government, in our foreign policy, we need to apply a gender lens. And that is a long process. We just started. We're absolutely not there yet, but my ambition is that when I leave, we are able to apply a gender lens on everything we do within the ministry.
Well, that's a good ambition, and Leila will be following you very closely, as she has been doing
She will be. We'll be working closely together.
Absolutely, as a partner, sometimes as a watchdog, but
yes.
Definitely, yeah.
Very good. I was just
following.
wondering if you were just as Lucy nodding very hard when you were listening to the previous speakers.
Yeah, I was also very touched by the previous speakers and also inspired by the presentation of Lucy. As Women Equals Men, we have a long track record working on women's rights and gender equality and making sure that our own government is consistently putting women's rights and gender equality on the political agenda. Not only when it comes to development aid, but definitely and certainly when it comes to also the other topics. They were already mentioned, security, defense, trade. It's not always easy, because if you don't put your attention to it, it's also the first thing that will fall off the political agenda.
Yeah.
So we are also very, I don't want to say concerned, but really curious about the political development in the Netherlands. Elections are coming up, and how do we make sure that there will be no Sweden 2.1 in the Netherlands revoking something that we have just begun with.
And before we look forward, Leila, you've been following the Dutch FFP closely. Looking back, how do you think it's going so far?
I think good steps have been taken. I cannot say honestly that we already have a feminist foreign policy. There are steps in the making, and really strong efforts are being made. But there is also a lot of inconsistencies. Like 2 weeks ago, I attended the General Assembly in New York, where our own Minister of Foreign Affairs announced the feminist foreign policy of the Netherlands, and they have done a terrific job also trying to get other countries to have a statement. So that was really well. But in the same week, there were also announcements of huge budget cuts relating to the development aid, where we know that feminist foreign policy, a very strong pillar within the feminist foreign policy, is development aid. So how those...
And which parts of the policy will suffer because of the budget cuts?
So they're all political choices. You know, these are still conversations that are going on, but there is a huge concern that women's rights and gender equality will be affected. And how does that coincide with your ambitious political agenda that you keep on telling on international stages? So that is also something that we as civil society keep on watching.
Peter Dirk, do you understand the concerns Leila has?
Of course, yes.
I always understand. I cannot say no, but of course, the message is on the one hand, and would like to. I'm happy that you say that, Leila. We did have an excellent event in New York on feminist foreign policy, where many ministers, I believe around 19, supported a political declaration on feminist foreign policy. So that is, I think. An important event, really a milestone in the agenda setting in developing feminist foreign policy. Yes, we do have severe budget cuts in development cooperation due to the increase in asylum seekers in the Netherlands. And that affects our budget of development cooperation. It will affect some of the ambitions we have, but there are no intentions that I am aware of at this moment to cut on our gender expenditures. We have, as you know better than I do, our SDG 5 fund. We are very proud of it as Netherlands. It's about $500 million for a period of 5 years of gender funding. It is there, and it will stay there. So we're not intending any cuts there.
Yeah. So I'm very glad and also happy with the confirmation, but it's not something that civil servants can find a solution for. No, this is a political decision. And if you zoom out a little bit, and it's already mentioned by Peter Derk, the announcement when it comes to the huge budget cuts has to do with the in-donor refugee costs. And in the Netherlands, we have, along with other countries, an agreement that those costs for the first 12 months are attributed to the ODA budget. That's an agreement, a political agreement. But what we also see is, and that was already presented in January this year, the Court of Auditors, they have said, like, there is a consistent under-budgeted budget for refugees. And it's not something that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs can solve. It's something that the government, the Dutch government, needs to find a solution on how it budgets on certain topics. And if you consistently under-budget on issues like refugees, it will continue to cannibalize the ODA budget. So it's not something that we can solve here, but it's a very important statement that I would like to make to our own government. If they are very serious about feminist foreign policy, and they are, as they say everywhere they go to international fora, they also have to make serious commitments when it comes to important issues like refugees and how they can reallocate budget for those topics.
Lucy, I saw you nodding again. Listening to Leila's reflection, but also to Peter Derk's ambitions for his new role. Do you think the goals and the ambitions are realistic for the Dutch FFP?
I mean, first of all, like, this roundtable has kind of brought to life the research that I do, which is about how do civil society organisations interact with states, particularly with questions around funding. So, like, my nodding and enthusiasm was just more just like, yeah, like, this is really interesting hearing this right in front of me. I mean, I share your concerns, mostly because as the precursor of feminist foreign policy, women, peace and security, the reporting on that has consistently showed that states are very happy to talk about it at the Security Council, at lovely events in New York, but when push comes to shove and budgets are being cut, it's a very easy budget to cut. It shouldn't be, but it's often, yeah. And so that's why, like, my sort of concerns around, like, the degree to which in a democracy like the Netherlands, where we have elections coming up, I'm very curious to see, like, to what extent is feminist foreign policy going to be part of the election debates? Do political parties dare to talk about it? Because I'm just very curious to see, like, is it going to be an issue that people play politics with. And I think it is, and it already is. But in terms of the funding and the budgeting, like that is not necessarily a new phenomenon when it comes to financing women's rights, when it comes to financing and supporting queer communities. I think a lot of it comes down to this idea that like women are seen as this like very elastic kind of resource, and we're amazingly strong and amazingly resilient and amazingly resourceful, but we also need to be paid properly for the work that we do.
Absolutely. You want to respond?
Was there a question there?
Well, would you like to respond? That's an open question. Would you like to respond?
On the last thing?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I said quite a bit.
Yeah. No, but of course, what's going to happen in the elections, we don't know. And as a civil servant, we cannot comment on that. We're also not speculating. We're of course we are there in an advisory capacity, and I think on what you said on the feminist foreign policy, it's no secret. I hope it will continue. I think we just started. We're absolutely not there yet, but we have. I think there are some good successes already, and already you mentioned on one thing on the agenda setting. We have had our event in New York. We'll have a conference, a huge conference on the 1st and 2nd of November, which will bring a lot of civil society activists, but also people from companies, from governments, around the table discussing various themes. We are working as ministry on a handbook, which is not a handbook in a traditional way. It's more like a website kind of thing, but giving concrete advice on all policymakers, whatever field you're working in, what you can do and how you can implement a feminist foreign policy.
And that big conference is in the beginning of November?
1st and 2nd
right?
of November,
yeah,
yes.
And I think the both of you will be there as well. What do you hope to put on the agenda during the conference?
Well, I mean, I hope to sort of just be sitting in the background listening to civil society speak to state, because to me that's more important than what I have to say about it.
Yeah.
Are you planning on saying something, Leila?
No, I've been invited, so I'm definitely going to, and also looking forward to it. It's actually a unique moment also to have like civil society together with state actors in one room talking about a policy that's very important and hopefully will shape the world in a better way also for the future generation.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah, sure.
I will be very interested to see the levels of representation from the queer community and how are sexual reproductive health rights being thought of in relation to trans women, lesbian women, bisexual women.
That was actually my next question.
Oh, I didn't know that. I honestly didn't know that.
Do you think certain groups or topics are missing in the FFP? Besides the one, because you also mentioned in your lecture about, you questioned whether the voices of Dutch Caribbean women were implemented in the policy, right?
Yeah, well, we don't know yet as people attending who is actually going to be there. So I'd be curious to see if the women and the representatives from these parts of the Netherlands and from Aruba are going to be there.
That's something, I think.
Yeah.
You're looking at me, but I'm not going to invite people.
I'm looking at you first. Do you think certain groups or topics are missing? And then I will come to you to answer the question.
I think it's very important I think it was Hawanati who was talking about rights, reality check, resourcing, representation. When we talk about feminist foreign policy, it needs to stay intersectional. It's not about only highly educated women, adding them and putting them on managerial positions, but it needs to be intersectional, specifically the ones the most marginalized, LBT women, women from ethnic, religious backgrounds, minorities, indigenous people. Is it enough? I think we can always do better. I've heard some concerns about the invitation policy when it comes to the conference, also with visa restrictions, and people would like to attend but have difficulties applying for visa. That's always something that needs to be on the table.
Peter Dirk.
Well, maybe first thing to say that on the Dutch Caribbean, we'll have, I think that's also maybe a bit symbolic, but we'll have the Prime Minister of Aruba, Evelyn Wever-Kroes, opening the conference. So there is at least some representation from the highest level at the start of the conference. We're still in the process of getting all the people on the lists, so we don't know exactly who has accepted the invitations, and I also do not know how they identify. But there will be many different communities represented. So I think, and it's our ambition to be as inclusive as possible. Of course, on the visa, yes, that can be a challenge. That's why we'll also advise participants to apply as early as possible. And the team that's working on it, I know they're working on it day and night, and also assisting on whenever they can, of course, in issues like visa applications. So hopefully everybody that wants to be there can be present. But I'm sure and I'm convinced, and if we look at the list of those that have already accepted, it will be a broadly representative presence. So I'm very excited, and I'm convinced it will be a landmark event.
I'm looking at the time, and I have a couple of things I want you to respond to Caroline and Hawa with the advice and input they gave you. I also want to see if there are some questions from the room. But there's also one question I still have, and that's about the Ministry of Foreign Affairs itself. As I think most people know, late 2022, a drastic report came out stating a serious and concerning problem with institutional racism and discrimination at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Now, we don't have to talk about the report itself, but do you think the report impacted the credibility of feminist foreign policy?
The report impacted all of us, and I think, but I don't think it impacts credibility, because I think feminism and feminist foreign policy is also about introspection, about being able to look at yourself in an honest way. And that's what we did. Racism is there. I think it's there in all organizations. We were the first ministry to do this, what we call in Dutch verkenning.
Exploration.
So I think it was a brave initiative, and of course some of the stories that came out were shocking. Some of the other stories were also for me quite recognizable. So we know it's there. So the question is more, what do we do about it? How do we address it? And how do we try and change the culture within the ministry and make it more inclusive, more equal, working on issues like training, on what we do, things like innocent bystander training, unconscious bias training, master classes for management, all the things we're doing in order to try and change the culture, which is a long process. Mm-hmm. Which has been taken up very diligently by senior management, and it's we're absolutely not there yet. But I think it is actually a good thing that we try to improve, and I think that is indeed looking, and that's also what we say in our feminist foreign policy. It is, of course, about a foreign policy, but at the same time, we're also looking at ourselves. We do it here in racism. We also do it when looking at, for instance, how are women represented, especially at higher levels within the ministry. We're also not there yet. We're improving, but I think about 37% of higher management is female, 63% is male. So we're absolutely not there yet. Improvement is going too slow. So there's
work to be
many
done.
things to be done.
Leila, do you think the report impacted the credibility of the feminist foreign policy?
Not so much. I think I was probably, it's a bit weird to hear, but I was actually very happy that it came out. Because we all know that these things happen, not only with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Recently, I heard some shocking stories with the Ministry of Social Affairs. It happens. Also in the private sector, it happens at school, it happens everywhere. But the only way to tackle and to hopefully have that change within your organization is to make it visible. But at the same time, to have the courage also to set up boundaries. If it occurs within your own organization, do you only talk about it, but do you also have a set of consequences when it happens? And how do you have safe space for people to speak up? I don't think it affects the credibility. It can actually, ironically, strengthen, help the feminist foreign policy. And perhaps in that way, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is actually an example within our own government how to deal with this.
And looking forward to the coming years, when it comes to feminist foreign policy, what should we be aware of when implementing the policy further the coming years, except for including, not forgetting certain groups and certain topics? Is there anything else that we should be aware of?
So the leading principle needs to be nothing about us without us. Also, so including specifically the groups that are going to be affected by your own policy, and make sure that we are coherent when it comes to funding, resourcing, but also how do we deal with certain issues that are perhaps contradictory when it comes to feminism, and have that open and honest discussion as a government, and not only the development aid sector.
Lucy, what should we be aware of in the coming years, implementing the policy further?
Trying to ensure that the funding lines and that there is some kind of protection around, if the policy is going to be there, that it's not going to be at risk at another election cycle. Because I can imagine working in civil society, it must be really strange being so dependent on the election cycles of another country to make sure that you know that your money is going to come through for you to do the work that you want to do. So I think questions around funding and budgeting are central. So I'm just reflecting on the discussion around the institutional racism, because it's also really important and really fascinating to hear. And I think these questions of representation, like it might have seemed like a strange place to start my lecture, but these questions of like nothing without us. Sorry, what did you just say? Nothing about us without us. Like, that is what this referendum in Australia is about. It's about Indigenous people being able to have agency and control over the laws that will affect them directly. And I think understanding how these sort of continuums operate across, local, national, and regional politics is super important. So very inspiring to listen to both of you.
I'm going to see if Katerina can spot some people from the audience who maybe have a question or input. And while we're doing that, I'm going to ask Peter Dirk to, because you've gotten some input and advice from Caroline and Howard earlier. And you've written it down. He's written it down, ladies.
Oh, absolutely wrote it down, and I think it's very useful advice on issues like more flexible funding. I really recognize that as a need to have this, and also direct funding to the local organizations, working capacity strengthening, but also working on the international level in organizations that you mentioned, CSW, Human Rights Council, CPD. Also having the voices heard at that level. So thank you very much. I will definitely take that with me. But what I think is even more important is when we design the next phase of our program for civil society, which is a work we're going to start in the near future. I think there it's very important to have your voices at the table, at the design of the programs, not just at the implementation, not just at the receiving end. But at the designing end. So I would like to invite you to take part in the conversations that we will be having, and to have your voices involved in the design phase. So I hope to see. I know you don't like Dutch food, but
I'm sure they will keep making their voices heard. Katerina, any questions or comments or input from the room? Yes.
Oh, it's not that Hi.
Hi.
My question is for Lucy Hall, who's a teacher at my university. And coincidentally, I had to read one of your articles for this week.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Women, peace, security. It was really interesting. Migration and forced displacement.
Yep.
And my question was about the latter, migration. Because I think we see a really interesting trend that more and more politicians who aren't proclaimed feminists are in favor of a feminist foreign policy, which is great. But at the same time, we see a very toxic dialogue on migration, domestically, but also internationally. So I was wondering what you think needs to be changed in order for a feminist perspective on migration, and that we can even include it in a feminist foreign policy.
I'm going to ask you to wait. I'm going to see if there are more questions or comments, and then we can come back to the table. Yes?
Hi, and my name is Esha. I'm from Kenya, and I'm really happy with the discussion around the policy, especially as Kenyans, where we are known of very good policies, and one is the two-third gender rule, where we are yet to implement. And for me, this maybe would be a call to action to some of the countries like mine, to see how are we accountable to the policies that we're making, and also as young women and girls, where are we in this foreign policy as well? Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe one more? Yes.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nakandi Mastula from Uganda. And the fallen feminist foreign policy for me reaffirms that indeed, first of all, women's rights are human rights. But then I'm looking at it in the context of Uganda. How can we understand this policy in our country, and how can we make sure that it works for us as a country in Uganda and it attends to the needs of girls and young women in our country? You know, the policy is really good, but we need to first of all understand the context of different countries. You know, different countries have different policies, and we have the way we understand these policies. So we need to first of all understand how it will be implemented in our country, and that different techniques and strategies we need to use to make sure that it works for us and it is for us. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's respond to the questions. All three very interesting questions, but we don't have a lot of time left, so if you could be very concise in your answers. Then we can move the conversations to the bar.
Do you want me to start?
Yes.
Yeah,
please.
sorry, I was frantically writing notes because I'm very good at being like, oh, this is what I want to say. And then like 2 minutes later, I'll be like, what was I going to say? ADHD is fun. Oh my goodness, this is a huge question. And I think it was really interesting what you were saying, Leila, about how these sort of pots of money between how the Netherlands responds to asylum, that money is kind of like a zero-sum game, right? Like there's only so much money, and if we take some from here, then something has to go from somewhere else. And I think that almost kind of speaks to one of the points that I was trying to make, which is thinking about, okay, well, these things are actually connected, and understanding how, you know, the causes, consequences, and reception of displacement are always gendered from beginning, middle to end. And you do see advances in refugee law to understanding how gender persecution can be grounds for asylum, also how sexuality can be grounds for asylum, but the implementation of that is very patchy, and it's extremely risky. And I think this connects to sort of another part of what I was also thinking of, which is how do we do this and not put people in harm's way? Because we know it's not an easy time to be an outspoken feminist.
No.
Or it's just not an easy time to be a feminist, full stop. Let alone if you speak up and call out sexism and racism. It's not easy, and it doesn't put you in a safe position, at least in my experience. And I think this is also a really interesting intersection between how we understand displacement and perhaps becoming a refugee because of the work that you're maybe doing in the countries where you're from, that it puts you in a position where you're at risk of being persecuted for doing the work that you're doing. And I hope that's not happening, and I hope you're getting support and protection, and that you're doing the work in a way where you feel safe and supported. But I also know that research indicates that that's often not the case. But I think also addressing these questions of displacement at an EU level. But you see how this becomes such an easy political football, which is appalling. It's absolutely appalling that a baby died in an asylum seeker centre 200 kilometres from here. That is just beyond unacceptable. And I can't believe that the government didn't fall over that. It did fall over other questions around asylum and migration, but how is that not being cause for more outrage concerns me in the current political landscape of the Netherlands, but also of Europe in general.
Thank you, Lucy. Leila, which question would you like to address?
Well, I was intrigued by the question I'm sorry, I didn't, your name? Mastura from Uganda, how FFP will be implemented. And again, the nothing about us without us principle. That's not up to us to decide how it should be implemented. At the same time, it is a human rights framework. It should be embedded in human rights. That's universal. So I know that there are a lot of activists from Uganda, also with the aid of the government, pushing against rhetoric against the LGBT community, and also putting their lives at stake, actually, when speaking up. As civil society, we try to help also set up tools for the embassy. So there's a women human rights defenders tool, how to deal with issues like this in certain contexts, in hostile environment. Because if you act and speak up in a hostile environment, there will be backlash. And how can you also, as a government, do that and support women's rights and human rights activists in a responsible way? Not only asking them to speak up, but at the same time giving them the protection they need the moment they speak up, because they will face backlash. if it's not them, then the relatives around them, the people around them. So, yeah, it's a very complicated issue.
Thank you. It's Dirk.
Very quickly. I think we cannot say yet at this stage how the feminist foreign policy will work out in every single country that we're working in. It's a good question. We are also, of course, very much involving our embassies, which are in the country, and I know our embassies in Kenya and Uganda are also working very closely with many of the consortia of civil societies that are working there under our funding. So I think it's always good to talk to our embassies, to the excellent teams we have, and to discuss with them the implications of the feminist foreign policy in Kenya, in Uganda, and have this dialogue, and also give your input, give your views, and have this question as an exchange on what you can do together. Because I think feminist foreign policy should be very inclusive, and should listen to all the voices of all genders, of the LGBTIQ+ community, of others. So I think this conversation needs to be had at the local level.
Thank you very much. And I think this is a continuous conversation. So this conversation tonight was not the last one as well. We unfortunately have run out of time. We could have gone on for hours, right, Lucy? Yeah.
But mostly to listen to everyone else, not for me to keep talking.
I would like to thank you, Laila Balie, Lucy Hall, and Peter Derkel for being here and for being part of this conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you for moderating.
Now, before I guide you to the bar for those other interesting conversations with a drink, I'm just going to go to Caroline, because Peter Derk responded to your input and advice. How do you respond to it? Just in 1 or 2 sentences. Stand up.
Thank you. I think he's been like a politician. No politician doesn't say yes or no. He says, yeah, you've been a diplomat about it. However, now I will do a call to action. You've spoken about the feminist foreign principle policy conference that is happening in November. I don't know if there are any girls and young women invited. So this is a request or a petition to have particularly girls from the She Leads Forum to be in that forum.
Thank you, Caroline. That's a very concrete call to action. Would you like to respond, or will you put that for the bar?
Let's do that.
You can respond at the bar.
Let's prolong this.
Thank you very much. I started this evening with Joyce. Maybe we can end the evening together. Please join me here, because we haven't seen you since the beginning. How did you listen to all the speakers and the stories?
It was very interesting to hear, and we heard a lot of back and forth about the feminist foreign policy. And I think everything came to the table because we discussed it before with Havanato and Caroline and the youth. And yeah, it really shows us that we have to be at the different spaces, and also in the future we'll be monitoring the feminist foreign policy. We will be there with our youth activists, but also looking at the spaces within the Netherlands and working with Women Equals Men and civil society. Yeah, and still I'm thinking about working together, linking up, so linking our youth activists with civil society internationally. We are already doing that with also strong civil society in the Netherlands, but also being at the international spaces. And I really like also this call to action that was mentioned. And I do have to say, with She Leads, we are in some of the technical committees with the embassy, so we have been invited, but we will keep pushing to be at all the spaces with our youth and our youth-led organizations.
And if we would like to know more about the She Leads program and Plan International Netherlands, where can we find that?
On social media, on Twitter, on our Facebook pages, and also on the website of Plan International, or one of their consortium partners, of Femnet, or for Defense for Children International, or for Terre des Hommes.
Thank you very much. We'll be following you and wish you lots of good luck and success with the program. Also for the ambassadors and the coordinators who were here. And thank you to all of my guests. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. And I think we should go to the bar now for continuation of this conversation. Thank you very much.